You're standing in a village square high in the Andes Mountains. The year is 1470 after Christ. You're watching your daughter being chosen. Her name is Cori. She's 9 years old. She's beautiful, delicate features, clear skin, perfect teeth. In the Incan Empire, physical perfection in a child means something very specific. It means she's been selected to become an Aklakona, a chosen woman, a virgin of the sun. Around you, the other villagers are celebrating. Your daughter has been honored by the Sapa Inca himself, chosen to serve Inti, the sun god. This is the highest privilege a commoner can achieve. The imperial official and nobleman from Cusco places a golden llama pin on your daughter's tunic. The symbol of her new status. Cori looks back at you as they lead her away. She's smiling. She doesn't understand yet what she's been chosen for. But you do. You've heard the stories, and you're trying not to scream. If you believe that the documented accounts of history's systematized religious horror must be preserved, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support helps expose the truth behind civilizations that history romanticizes. Here's what you need to understand about the Aklakona system in the Incan Empire. This wasn't a small operation. This was an industrial-scale selection, training and utilization of young girls as part of state religious infrastructure. At the height of the Incan Empire, roughly 1438 to 1533 after Christ, there were thousands of chosen women housed in complexes called Aklawasi across the empire. The largest Aklawasi in Cusco, the capital, held approximately 1,500 girls and women. The Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon, writing in the 1540s based on first-hand interviews with survivors, described the system in detail. His accounts, corroborated by other conquistador chroniclers like Cristobal de Molina and Juan de Betanzos, provide a disturbing picture. Archaeological evidence discovered over the past 3 decades has confirmed the documentary sources and made them worse. Act 1. The selection, the choosing, happened every year across the Tawantinsuyu, the 4 quarters of the Incan world, stretching from modern Ecuador to Chile. Imperial officials traveled to every village. They were called the Chasqui Apupanaka, the choosers. Their job was to identify girls between 8 and 10 years old who met specific criteria. Physical perfection was mandatory. No scars, no birthmarks, symmetrical features, clear eyes, perfect teeth, good posture. These weren't just aesthetic preferences. The Incas believed physical perfection reflected spiritual purity. Blemished bodies couldn't serve the sun god properly. But there was another criterion that the Spanish chroniclers noted repeatedly: beauty. Specifically, the kind of beauty that would appeal to the Sapa Inca and his nobles. Think about what that means. Imperial officials traveling the empire, examining 8-year-old girls, selecting them based partly on how attractive they'd be to powerful men in a few years. The selection was mandatory. Families had no choice. Refusal meant death for the entire family. The Sapa Inca's word was absolute law, but most families didn't refuse. The propaganda was effective. Your daughter would serve the sun god. She'd live in luxury. She'd be honored forever. She might catch the eye of the Sapa Inca himself. Become an imperial concubine. Elevate your entire family's status. The Spanish chronicler Garcilaso de la Vega, himself of Incan noble descent, recorded what parents were told during the selection ceremonies. Your daughter has been blessed by Inti. She will live among the gods. Honor her. Celebrate her. She belongs to the sun now. The girls were taken immediately. No waiting, no prolonged goodbyes. Clean separation was considered more merciful. Cori, 9 years old, is led away from her village. She's with perhaps 30 other girls from surrounding communities, all between 8 and 10, all beautiful, all perfect. They walk for weeks, up mountain paths, through valleys, across rope bridges suspended over gorges that seemed to fall forever. The journey itself was part of the process. Separation from home. Introduction to the vastness of the empire. demonstration of power. By the time they reached Cusco, the girls understood they were no longer individuals. They were property of the state, servants of the sun, assets of the empire. Act 2. The temple education. The Aclawasi in Cusco was massive. Stone walls 3 times the height of a man, one entrance, heavily guarded in man. No windows facing outward. The Spanish called these compounds convents when they first saw them. The parallel seemed obvious: religious women, living in seclusion, serving divine purposes. But the comparison falls apart rapidly when you understand what happened inside. Archaeological excavations of Aclawasi sites, particularly work done in the 1990s and 2000s at Pachacamac and other locations, reveal the internal structure. The complexes were organized with brutal efficiency, different sections for different stages of the girls' development. Training rooms, weaving halls, dormitories, and private chambers whose purpose the archaeological evidence makes horrifyingly clear. Cori enters the Aclawasi at 9 years old. She's placed with approximately 60 other newly chosen girls in the initiation quarters. The first year was education. The girls learned to weave the finest textiles in the world, the kumbi cloth that only royalty could wear. They learned to make chicha, the sacred corn beer used in religious ceremonies. They learned prayers, rituals, songs in praise of Inti. They were taught that their bodies belonged to the sun god, that their virginity was sacred, that they were blessed above all other women in the empire. They were called Mamakona Little Mothers, sacred women. The older Eklakona who supervised their education treated them gently. The food was good, the quarters comfortable, the work challenging but not brutal. For the first year, it almost seemed like the honor their parents had been promised. Then the girls turned 10, sometimes 11, depending on physical development. And the Sapa Inca came to choose. Here's what the Spanish chroniclers documented about this selection process, corroborated by multiple sources. Several times a year, the Sapa Inca, the emperor, considered a living god, would visit the Aclawasi, sometimes alone with advisors, sometimes with visiting nobles he wanted to honor or reward. The girls would be assembled, dressed in their finest kumbi cloth tunics, their hair woven with gold and silver threads, and the Sapa Inca would choose. The Spanish priest Cristobal de Molina, who interviewed both former Eklakona and Incan nobles after the conquest, recorded the emperor's options. Some girls were designated as full virgins, true servants of the sun god. They would remain in the Aclawasi, maintaining their virginity for life, serving religious functions. Some girls were designated as gifts. The Sapa Inca would give them to nobles, generals, or favored administrators as rewards. Marriage to an imperial gift elevated a man's status significantly. These girls were considered blessed unions, and some girls were designated as imperial concubines, secondary wives of the Sapa Inca himself. Cori is 11 years old. She's standing in a line with the other girls her age. Perhaps 80 girls total in this selection ceremony. The Sapa Inca in this period, likely Tupac Inca Yupanqui, one of the empire's most powerful rulers, walks slowly down the line, examining faces, occasionally stopping, tilting a girl's chin up to see her better. He stops in front of Cori, studies her for a long moment. She's been trained not to meet his eyes directly, to look at a god's face uninvited as death. He gestures. An attendant places a red feather in her hair. Red feather means imperial selection. She belongs to the Sapa Inca now. Think about what this moment means for an 11-year-old girl. She's been taught this is an honor, the highest honor. Other girls are crying in joy when they're selected for any purpose. It means they please the sun god. But Cori also knows what the older women have whispered, the rumors that spread even in controlled environments. Girls with red feathers go to the private chambers, and they serve the Sapa Inca personally, in every way. This is where the Spanish chroniclers' accounts become carefully worded. They were Catholic priests writing for Catholic audiences. They couldn't be too explicit. But the archaeological evidence doesn't rely on euphemism. Act 3. The Imperial Chambers excavations at the Cusco Aclawasi site, conducted in 2008-2012, revealed a section of the complex that matched Spanish descriptions of the chambers of royal pleasure. Small rooms. Elevated sleeping platforms. Evidence of expensive textiles. And, significantly, separate from the communal dormitories where most Eklakona lived. These were private chambers, and the girls who lived there served one specific function. The Sapa Inca practiced imperial polygamy on a scale that shocked even the Spanish conquistadors, who'd seen plenty of royal excess in Europe. The emperor had one primary wife, the Koya, usually his sister, following Incan royal incest traditions to keep the divine bloodline pure. But he also maintained hundreds of secondary wives and concubines. The Spanish sources suggest numbers ranging from 300 to over 1,000, depending on the emperor. Many of these women were drawn from the Eklakona. Girls selected at 11 or 12, married to the emperor in mass ceremonies, and moved into the imperial sector. The Spanish chronicler Pedro Pizarro, cousin of the conquistador, recorded a conversation with an Incan noble who explained the system. The girls were wives in name only. They were available for the Sapa Inca's pleasure whenever he desired. Some he visited many times, some only once. Some he gave to visiting nobles as entertainment during feasts. Read that again. Girls as young as 11 or 12, given to adult men as entertainment. This wasn't romance. This wasn't even standard political marriages. This was systematized sexual access disguised as religious honor. Corey, 11 years old, is moved to the imperial chambers. She's with approximately 40 other recently selected girls. The older concubines, women in their teens and 20s who'd been there longer, try to prepare them, teach them what to expect, how to behave. Here's what happened, based on multiple documentary sources and anthropological analysis of Incan sexual culture. When the Sapa Inca desired, he would summon one or more of the Eklakona to his private chambers in the royal palace. The girls had no right to refuse. Refusal meant death not just for the girl, but often for her entire original family back in her village. The euphemism in the chronicles is serving the Sapa Inca in his chambers. But the meaning is clear. These weren't isolated incidents. The Sapa Inca had absolute access to hundreds of girls and young women, designated as his property, taught from childhood that serving him was serving the sun god. The psychological mechanism was sophisticated. The girls had been carefully taught to believe that sexual contact with the Sapa Inca was a religious act. He was a living god. To be touched by divinity was blessing. Some of the girls, according to the Spanish accounts, competed for the emperor's attention. Having his child elevated your status, your family's status. You'd be provided for, honored. But others, and this is where the fragmentary accounts from survivors become devastating, experienced it as violation disguised as worship. Molina recorded one conversation with a former Eklakona who'd survived the Spanish conquest. I'll translate from his Spanish. I was 12 when he first summoned me. I was terrified. The older women told me to be grateful many girls were never chosen, and I had pleased the son of the sun. But the first wasn't grateful. I was a child, and when it was done, I bled. I went back to my chambers and cried until I vomited. She continued serving for 6 more years before the Spanish arrived, and the system collapsed. Now here's where the system becomes even darker, because imperial access wasn't the only function the Eklakona served. If this moment in history doesn't make you question how we romanticize ancient civilizations, you might be missing the lesson. The Incan Empire was architecturally brilliant, administratively sophisticated, and built on the systematic exploitation of children. Act 4. The gift economy. The Sapa Inca used Eclacona as diplomatic tools, rewards for favored nobles, incentives for military leaders, diplomatic gifts to conquered peoples' rulers to cement alliances. This was official policy, documented extensively by Spanish chroniclers. After major military victories, the Sapa Inca would distribute Eclacona to successful generals and officers. The girls were ranked by beauty and presumed virginity. Higher-ranked officers received more desirable girls. During diplomatic negotiations, Eclacona were given to foreign nobles as demonstration of Incan wealth and generosity. The girls symbolized the empire's power. We have so many beautiful women, we can give them away. The Spanish sources describe ceremonies where dozens of Eclacona would be distributed at once. Mass marriages performed by Incan priests, binding the girls to men they'd never met. Garcilaso de la Vega recorded the protocol. The girl would be brought forward. The noble receiving her would be announced. The priest would conduct a brief ceremony. The girl would be handed over like property, because that's what she was, property of the state, transferred to a new owner. Think about what this meant for the girls. You're 14 years old. You've spent 5 years in the Aclawasi, told you're serving the sun god. You've been taught to weave, pray, and submit. Then you're told you're being given to a general in a province 3 weeks' journey away. A man you've never met, middle-aged, battle-scarred with other wives already. You're escorted to his home. You become his property. Whatever he wants from you, labor, sexual access, childbearing, you provide. Refusal isn't an option, and you're supposed to be grateful. You're an imperial gift, blessed. The girls given away often fared worse than those kept in the Aclawasi. At least in Cusco, there was supervision. Standards. The emperor wanted his property maintained properly. But once distributed to distant nobles, the girls disappeared into private households. No oversight, no protection. Some of these men treated their imperial gifts relatively well. They were valuable markers of status, after all. But others treated them as sexual slaves, which functionally they were. Cori was one of the girls kept in Cusco. She served the Sapa Inca directly for several years. According to the one fragmentary account that might be her, the identification is uncertain. She bore a child when she was 16. The baby was taken almost immediately. Children of imperial concubines weren't raised by their mothers. They were raised by state nurses, tracked in genealogical records, potentially useful for future political arrangements. Cori saw her child perhaps 3 times before she was weaned. Then the baby disappeared into the imperial household. She never learned her daughter's name. Act 5. The ultimate sacrifice. Here's where the archaeological evidence becomes undeniable and devastating. Starting in 1995, high-altitude archaeological expeditions began discovering something horrifying on Andean mountain peaks. Frozen bodies, perfectly preserved by ice and cold. Children, mostly girls. Girls. These weren't burial sites. These were sacrifice locations. Capacocha cites the Incan practice of child sacrifice to the sun god. The most famous is the Maiden of Lelaico, discovered in 1999 near the Argentina-Chile border at 22,000 feet. She was approximately 15 years old when she died. Cause of death: exposure and cold, possibly accelerated by coca and chicha given to sedate her. The evidence suggests she was left on the mountain summit to freeze to death as an offering to Inti. Here's what makes this relevant to the Eclacona system. Analysis of her hair, clothing, and the artifacts found with her revealed something significant. She'd spent the last year of her life in Cusco, eating high-status food, wearing combi cloth. Her hair was elaborately braided in styles specific to the Eclacona. She was a chosen woman, virgin of the sun, and her ultimate service was death. The Capacocha sacrifices were the highest form of religious offering in the Incan Empire. Children, specifically beautiful, perfect children, were walked to remote mountain peaks and left to die as gifts to the gods. Multiple chroniclers documented the practice. The Spanish were horrified, used it as justification for conquest. But the archaeological evidence confirms the accounts are accurate. Since 1995, more than 20 child sacrifice sites have been discovered in the Andes. Most of the victims were girls between 10 and 15 years old. Many show evidence of having lived in Cusco before their deaths. Several were almost certainly Eclacona. Think about the complete life cycle of this system. Selected as a child for your beauty and perfection. Raised in the Acloasi. Taught you're honored and blessed. Used sexually by the emperor or given to nobles. Possibly bearing children you'll never raise. And if you're especially perfect, especially favored by the gods, your reward is being drugged, dressed in fine clothing, walked up a mountain and left to freeze to death. The system closed the loop. The girls entered sacred. They were exploited throughout their useful years, and some exited through ritualized murder disguised as holy sacrifice. The Incan Empire called this honor the sun god's blessing. The archaeological evidence calls it what it is: systematic abuse of children on an industrial scale, wrapped in religious justification. Act 6. The collapse and the silence. When the Spanish conquered the Incan Empire in 1533, the Acloasi system collapsed. The conquistadors found thousands of women and girls in the compounds. Their initial response was complex. Horror at the systematic sexual exploitation, but also practical exploitation of their own. Many Spanish soldiers took Eclacona as wives or concubines themselves. Some of the Eclacona were freed. Many had nowhere to go. Their families were distant. They'd been gone for years. Some married Spanish settlers. Some became servants in colonial households. A few became sources for the chroniclers, providing first-hand accounts of the system, but most just disappeared into the demographic chaos of conquest. Disease killed perhaps 90 of the indigenous population over the next century. The Eclacona died with the rest, and their stories were largely lost. The Spanish had their own motives for documenting Incan sexual practices. It justified conquest as Christian salvation. But the women's own voices were rarely recorded. What we have are fragments, pieces of accounts filtered through Spanish priests and soldiers, archaeological evidence that reveals structure but not experience, and the frozen children on mountaintops, silent witnesses to what the empire did to perfect girls. Here's what haunts me about the Eclacona system. It was celebrated. Families competed to have their daughters chosen. The girls themselves were taught to view it as blessing. The entire empire participated in the fiction that this was religious honor. The propaganda was so effective that even the victims often believed it. Some of the surviving Eclacona who spoke to Spanish chroniclers defended the system, insisted they'd been honored, that serving the Sapa Inca was serving divinity. They'd been so successfully indoctrinated that they couldn't recognize their own exploitation. That's the true horror. Not just the systematic sexual abuse of children, not just the human sacrifice, but the elaborate psychological architecture that made the victims grateful for their abuse. The Incan Empire was brilliant at this. They built a system where exploitation wore the mask of blessing, where rape was redefined as worship, where child sacrifice was framed as divine honor. And it worked for centuries. Recent archaeological work continues to reveal the scale. Excavations at provincial Acloasi sites across Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador show the system was implemented empire-wide, not just Cusco. Everywhere the Incas controlled, thousands of girls, decade after decade, century after century. How many QRAs were selected, trained, exploited, and destroyed? We'll never have exact numbers. The Incas used quipu knotted strings for record keeping, and most were destroyed or lost. But the archaeological footprint suggests a massive system, industrial in scale, efficient in execution. devastating in impact, and almost completely erased from popular understanding of the Incan Empire. When we teach about the Incas, we focus on Machu Picchu, road systems, agricultural innovations, architectural genius. We rarely discuss the archaeology, the systematized exploitation, the child sacrifices on mountain peaks. That's not an accident. Empires protect their reputations across centuries, and the story of the Virgins of the Sun complicates the narrative of Incan sophistication. But here's why this history matters. Because systems of exploitation don't announce themselves as evil. They wear masks, religious duty, cultural tradition, divine honor. The girls who died on mountain peaks died believing they were blessed. The women who served the Sapa Inca believed they were worshiping divinity. The families who gave up their daughters believed they were receiving honor. Everyone believed the lie. That's what made the system sustainable. If you believe that these stories, uncomfortable, brutal, carefully buried stories need to be told, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're exposing the history that ancient empires tried to erase and modern romanticism tries to ignore. Drop a comment with your thoughts. I'll see you in the next investigation. You can visit Peru today, walk through Cusco, see the remains of the Alcalá, now a church built on the foundations. It's beautiful. The stones are perfectly fitted, classic Incan masonry. Tourist guides explain the Virgins of the Sun, usually in sanitized terms. Religious women, honored servants, cultural treasures. They rarely mention the age of selection, the sexual exploitation, the child sacrifices on frozen peaks. In 2019, researchers published analysis of the Lalayaco maiden's final year. Using hair samples, they tracked her journey, from a village to Cusco, months in the capital, then the final pilgrimage to the mountain. They could identify when she was given coca and chicha to sedate her. The doses increased as she climbed. By the time she reached the summit, she was likely barely conscious. She was seated in a stone chamber, arranged in a fetal position, dressed in her finest combi cloth, surrounded by gold and silver offerings, then left alone as the temperature dropped and the air thinned. Freezing to death at high altitude takes hours, sometimes days if you're sedated and your body is fighting. She died believing she was honored by the gods. She was 15 years old. Her name was never recorded. We'll never know if she was Corey, or one of the thousands of other girls chosen for their beauty and perfection. But her body remains on that mountain, preserved by ice, a witness to what the Incan Empire did to the Virgins of the Sun. Beautiful, perfect, blessed, and destroyed.